But we started writing a business plan, and this was now the end of December, middle of December 1999. So the internet was very, very, hot, still hot. And the business plan initially, we said that we needed at least $750,000, or we needed $750,000, but at the very least we needed $325,000 in order to bootstrap the business. And while working at our firm jobs, we wrote the plan and wrote the concept and started scoping out how the system would work and hired a developer to do that, thinking that we would be able to get this financing closed. And then unfortunately the market started to collapse. The dot-com bubble essentially had burst, and we had the word web in our name, which wasn't necessarily a great selling point at the time. Whereas we had about $800,000 in commitments, within a few days that went down to 500 and 400, and so we basically just said, let's just close the financing now. We told people that if we didn't raise at least $325,000, that we would give them all their money back. So we told everyone who was still in, want to let you know there's still huge enthusiasm for the business. Get your checks in by the end of the week, or else we don't know if there's going to be room for you. All the tricks that I'm sure all of you that are in the process of starting businesses do as well. And fortunately, we closed on $345,000 from 44 separate people, which was like herding cats over the 10 years of the business. But we actually got the financing closed, and around March. So in February, I gave notice at my law firm. I went into the CFO and I told him that I was actually the person that wasn't my friend, and he had me speak with the then hiring partner. And I remember walking into the hiring partner's office, and I knocked on the door, and I said, "Do you have a moment?" And he said, "Sure." And I said, "Do you mind if I close the door?" And he said to me, "You haven't been here long enough to ask to close the door. What could you possibly want?" And I said, "Well, I want to tell you about a business that I've been thinking about starting, and I had been thinking about starting. I'm now at the point where I'm going to move forward with it, and I wanted to tell you, and I want to certainly give you as much notice as you possibly can," knowing full well that I was a first-year associate, had been at the firm for 4 months, didn't really know much of anything, wasn't adding a whole lot of value, but certainly didn't want to leave the firm in the lurch. And so he sat me down and he asked me about what the business does, and I pitched him, and he said, "So what do you want from us, or from me?" And I said, "Well, one is I'd love if you were an investor." We hadn't closed the final financing, and I said, "And second, I'd love it if the firm signed up as our first pilot client." And he said, "Okay, done and done, and also if things don't work, you can always come back." And that was just, I say that because it was just one of those moments where he could have been angry or frustrated or what have you, but he just did something that I've just, has left a sort of indelible mark in my mind, and as a result, I have such fondness for the firm and for all the people that initially got started. And so, I've always tried to make it a point whenever I hear about people that are getting started in businesses, if I can be, helpful, or any of the folks within your network, hopefully they'll be as helpful as they possibly can. And so, with that in mind, if you want to follow up after this meeting and talk about if you have ideas, or if you have friends that have ideas, love to talk about it and see if I can be helpful to them. So in any event, February 12th, I actually left the firm, and we closed on our financing in March. And we were supposed to launch our technology at the end of March, and it didn't really work. We had a friend of a friend who was building the application, and what we found is that if we had 3 concurrent users, the system would crash. And that's not very scalable. We figured it out. We don't know how big the market is to begin with, but we know that we want more than 3 people using it at the same time. Now at this point we're sort of bootstrapped, we're highly undercapitalized, we've given notice at our firms, there's no turning back. And we scoured our contacts for relationships with for people that had relationships with web development companies or software development companies. And one of our investors had a friend who just acquired a web development company based in Utah. And so we met with that firm, and he had bought the business essentially to build an application in the electrical industry, some sort of electrical disintermediation business. But of the dozens of developers that he had, there were 3 that were not tasked on a project. And he said, "Here's what we'll do. We'll build your application for you at a hugely discounted rate, but we'll own the code. and then at the end of 3 years, you'll license the code back from us at what he didn't say, some absurdly ridiculous absorbent rate, but you don't really have much choice. So does that sound like a good deal? And we said, that sounds like a great deal, because what else could you do? And my wife, who actually was my partner at the jewelry business at University of Maryland, also was involved with Seamless Web very early on, and she basically said, if we're going to enter into this arrangement, we should make sure that there are certain triggers where we'd have the right to buy the code back at a discount, which was super smart, and took her advice, and we did that. And they essentially took over the old platform, shored it up so that we could have more than 3 concurrent users, and started building a completely fresh platform. And that was right around May. And then in November, fortunately for us, unfortunately for them, some of those things, the trigger got triggered, and they called us and they said, if you want, you have the right now to buy the code back at a very small price. So we went back out to the marketplace, and by this time we had dozens of clients that were using the system, hundreds or thousands of users, not hundreds of thousands, hundreds or thousands of users who were using the platform, and we went out to mostly our original investors, who at this point saw the traction. They said, we'd like to double down, and we had a few other investors, and we were getting ready to close on a financing of about $1 million, and a friend of mine from the University of Maryland told me about a mutual friend who started a venture fund, a small venture fund. They had about $20 million under management, and he strongly encouraged me to meet with him. And up to that point, I had a perspective around venture capital, which was partly influenced by working at a firm that worked with a lot of venture capital firms. And my thought was really, there's 3 kinds of scenarios in an early stage business, maybe even 4, but one is the business is wildly successful. And my thought was, if the business is wildly successful and you have a venture capital firm as a partner, you won't be running the company, because they'll want someone who actually knows what they're doing at the helm. So in the sort of best case scenario, you don't really have a role. Now, this, I'm sure, I've now learned that this was very ignorant, but again, 10 years ago. The second scenario is the business is doing incredibly poorly, in which case you have the same outcome. Someone else is going to be running the business. And then you sort of have this, one, you're out of business, right? That goes without saying. That was the fourth. But then you also have this other scenario of the business is doing okay. You're a founder, so you're super passionate about it. You're not going to be able to attract anyone else to run the business. And so you have potentially a nice business, but it's never really going to get to scale. So I was very averse to bringing in institutional capital. And after several weeks of talking with my friend, he agreed to very angel-oriented terms. It was really the same terms that we'd agreed to with our angels, who are really our friends and family, and anyone that would look at us, of those 44 people that initially invested. And what we did was we scaled the angels back, and we took on an institutional investor, largely under the guise or the thought of the world can change dramatically, and the experience that we had, where a lot of angels were saying, we're not interested, we're not interested, we're not interested. If you need capital at that time, it can be catastrophic to your business. Whereas when you do work with an institutional investor, they have a fund that they want to deploy. And so even if the macro environment is challenging, they want to deploy their capital, and they want to certainly support their own portfolio companies, which made a lot of sense to me. And I think now it has been validated that really is the way institutional investors operate or think about their business. So we raised $1.4 million in December of 2000. And the business, fortunately started to thrive and grow, and we started basically March, April of 2000, and then in October of 2001, we believed that we would have been profitable. With the events of 9/11, we needed some immediate financing, and I'll explain why in a moment. So we went back out to our investors, including the institution, and raised $650,000. And that was really all the invested capital in the business. So we raised about $2.4 million of invested capital.